Welcome to the Yes You Coaching Podcast. This is episode 8, and I'm your host, Anna Manning, owner and founder of Yes You Coaching. So, today we're going to be talking about self doubt. Now, I can hear you being like, ooh, what a topic. Self doubt. That'll have them rolling in the aisles. Well, maybe. But also a really real issue that most of us face either all of the time or some of the time. And I wanted to start by giving you the dictionary definition, which I actually thought was really interesting, which is self doubt. It says in the Oxford English Dictionary is a lack of confidence in oneself or one's abilities. And I was like, I wouldn't necessarily have characterized it exactly in that way, but I am by and large a confidence coach, right? And I help people with developing their professional confidence. And one of the things that I see really, really impacting for people's professional confidence is self doubt. So obviously, it has a massive impact on how confident we feel when we experience a lot of self doubt. However, I don't think necessarily that the problem is self doubt. I think the problem is us not really knowing how to handle self doubt. Because my take on self doubt is that whilst you can reduce the level of self doubt that you experience, it is pretty inevitable that you are going to experience self doubt. And that is for two reasons. The first is that you have a brain which is programmed to scan your environment for any risk, any danger, any potential problematic scenario, and bring that to your attention. And your brain does that in order to keep you safe and to keep you alive. One of the reasons that we're still here after millions of years is that our ancestors' brains were good at spotting risk and danger and being alert to it, aware of it, and being able to deal with it. Now, you're still really able to do that. Your brain is naturally programmed to do that. And how that shows up in our professional life is if your brain is scanning your professional environment and it sees a potential for danger or risk, which can be emotional as well as physical, probably is more emotional for most of us, like the risk of looking stupid or being embarrassed or being exposed or being kind of separated from the group somehow by, for instance, sticking our hand up and making a challenge about something that we don't agree with. Our brain signals danger to us in doing that. And self doubt is the part of that process which kind of says, oh, wait a minute, are you sure about this? You sure that's a good idea? You sure you're the right person to say that? Are you sure you're not going to look stupid if you do that? Right. So it's part of this kind of safety mechanism that our brain has in place to keep us safe. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't feel quite problematic. I think it's inevitable, but it can be a tricky customer. The second reason that I think it is inevitable, you have a normally functioning human brain, right? So it's inevitable in that regard. But the second reason is because humans essentially are always seeking to push the boundaries, to do new things, to create stuff, to, go one step further. Most of us aren't content to just sit in the exact life that we have. We're interested in how things could be, how things could change, what things could look like. We're interested in developing our careers and our skills and our capabilities. And with that comes the inevitable out of the comfort zone, got to be a beginner, going to be stuff that I don't know how to deal with, I don't know how to do, that's new. Enter stage left, self doubt. So when you're a human with a normally functioning human brain, it's programmed for doubt. And when you're a human with a normally functioning, let's say brain, heart, soul, whatever, it's programmed to to go beyond, to want more, to keep progressing. And those two things both bring up self-doubt. So I'm not going to recommend that we try to like banish self-doubt and remove self-doubt in 3 easy steps, right? I wish there was a course that you could just buy online that was like, have no more self-doubt ever. But I just don't really think it's that realistic. I think you can reduce the amount of self-doubt that you experience, possibly, but I think it's a better approach to just work out how to handle self-doubt in a way that works and in a way that it doesn't stop you from doing the stuff that you want to do. So I started this kind of the idea of this episode from quite a personal perspective because I experience self-doubt all the time, obviously, because I'm a normal human and I'm always doing stuff. But I used to experience self-doubt in a really different way than how I experience it now. And when I thought for this episode about how I used to handle self-doubt when it popped up, it was 3 main ways that I used to handle it. So, or not handle it, as the case may be. And the first was I would kind of get stuck in it and I would let it stop me or shut me down. And the second thing, which seems counter to the first, but somehow it wasn't, was that I wouldn't really engage with the self-doubt or address it. I would sort of shove it down, almost sort of try to kind of paper over it, like ignore it. And the third way that I used to handle it or not handle it was that I would hide it. I didn't want people to know that I experienced self-doubt, even though everyone does, right? So I let it stop me and shut me down. I didn't really engage with it or address it. I shoved it down and I hid it. And when I thought about the ways in which I handle self-doubt now, it was actually amazingly the opposite of those 3 things. And what I wanted to do in this episode is walk you through the top kind of 3 things that I've done that allow me to handle self-doubt in a completely different way than I used to handle it. And I hope you don't mind me kind of sharing this like really from my perspective. Obviously, I work with clients on self-doubt all of the time, but this is really my take on how I have handled self-doubt and what I've done that's enabled me to experience self-doubt, but actually still keep going, keep trying things, keep doing things. So it hasn't allowed, it hasn't shut me down. So I've had a lot of change in my life in the last, we all had a lot of change in our lives in the last 3 years, right? Pandemic, massive. I also have decided to separate from a 10-year marriage, and I am now divorced, and I bought my apartment that I used to own with my husband. I have also quit my corporate full-time job and started a business full-time. And you can imagine the self-doubt that would come up with all of those things. And it has in spades. But the only reason I've been able to actually do all those things, I think, is partly because I know how to handle that self-doubt now in a way that I just didn't before. And when people say, oh my God, you're starting your own business, you've quit your job. Oh, that's brave. And they look at me like I'm slightly crazy. I think the reason that I've been able to be brave is because that self-doubt does still exist. Is it going to work? Am I going to be able to pay my bills? Will I ever find love again? Blah, 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 right? All of that self-doubt exists, but I know how to handle it now in a way that enables me to do what I really want to do. And I know is in my heart to do and keep going. So my kind of 3 top things that I'm going to walk you through. The first one is that I made a decision that self-doubt is not going to stop me. So in the past, I would hear the voice of that self-doubt and I would, not always, but sometimes let it completely stop me and like make me freeze in fear. I can remember this one occasion where I was walking through the concourse at Victoria train station in rush hour, and anyone who's done that knows it is really, really, really busy. And I was stood stock still in the middle of this concourse, and I guess people must have been maneuvering around me, but because they're English, obviously no one was saying anything, because I was like stock still, and I was just listening to the self-doubt in my head, and it literally had me frozen to the spot. I was thinking about whether I was gonna move away from my kind of legal world and work in a completely different area. And my brain was like tied in knots about all the self-doubt. Like, it was like, you can't do this. You're not one of those people. You just have to continue doing what you're doing. You're too scared. You're too afraid. Like, it was crippling. And it had me physically and mentally rooted to the spot. And a while after that, I just thought, do you know what? I make the decision now, like, I declare I am not going to let self-doubt be the one that decides whether or not I do something, whether or not I try something. I know that when I'm doing things that are new or risky or different, self-doubt is going to be there. It's like it's going to pay me a visit. It's almost like driving past, this is a shit example, but it's almost like driving past a checkpoint, and you know that when you drive past the checkpoint, there's going to be someone there being like, "Hi, what are you doing today?" Yeah, the self-doubt is going to like jump in the passenger seat of the car and be like, "Oh, you're going for a ride, are you? Hello, I'm coming with you." So I know now just to expect that it's going to come. But I also know not to let it make the decisions. So that's the first thing. And just quickly, think about whether there are parts of your life or even specific things that you would like to do or you would like to achieve where self-doubt at the moment is completely stopping you. So it might be that self-doubt is completely stopping you from speaking up in a meeting. It might be that it's completely stopping you from going for promotion or putting yourself forward for something, like being in a more senior setting or presenting or asking for a pay rise, right? There might be areas of your life, like there were for mine, where self-doubt is literally the one in the driver's seat. It is ruling the roost. It's making the decision about what you do or don't do in your life. And you might want to think about that. Do you want the voice of your self-doubt to be the one that's making the decisions in your life? I decided that I didn't want that. And you could think, if the voice of self-doubt is making some of the decisions in your life and it is stopping you, think about what the logical conclusion of that is. Where does your life end up if self-doubt is the one that is allowed to make all the decisions and that is in the driving seat? And if the presence of self-doubt means, ooh, stop, don't do anything, how do you get to the end of your life? What does a life lived like that look like? That was a tongue twister. And is that the kind of life that you want to live? Is that the kind of career you want to have or not? And if not, I'm going to encourage you to make a decision like I did, that self-doubt isn't going to stop you. Yes, it can come along for the ride. Maybe it's going to slow you down. But maybe you don't let it stop you anymore. The second thing that I do now is I try, and I'm going to say try because I do not get this right all the time, to take really nice care of myself and care of the self-doubt when it shows up. So, before I said that one of the ways that I used to handle self-doubt or not was that I wouldn't really engage with it. I would hear it and I would get caught in like, you know what it's like when you get caught in like a spiral of thinking and it just goes and goes and goes and goes and goes. I would engage with it on that level, like my mind would engage with it, but I wouldn't engage my kind of conscious brain with it. I would try to shove it down and ignore it. And now I handle that really, really differently. I engage my faculties with the self doubt when it arrives. And I try to kind of take care of myself and the self doubt instead of ignoring it and forcing it down and powering it through. So, what I started to do was to actually notice the self doubt and actually start to acknowledge its presence and what it was saying. I started to treat the part of me that was doubting like I would treat someone else who was doubting, or like I would treat a scared kid. So instead of like shoving it away, powering it down, or even arguing with it, which I also used to do, be like, this is ridiculous. This is, this is stupid. I would instead start to try and be more soft with it, to try and tend to it and be gentle with it. And my God, would you not believe how much better it was to do that than yell at it or ignore it or shove it down or try and power through? I honestly think this is a basic life skill, which really, unfortunately, they do not teach people. Well, let this be the first lesson if this is the first time you've heard of approaching something like this. The self-doubt is part of you. So if you're ignoring it or arguing with it or pushing it down or powering through, you're ignoring or arguing with a part of you which actually is afraid and is trying to warn you that something might go wrong or something is dangerous or something might have a really bad outcome. I want you to imagine how you would deal with a scared kid that was self-doubting. You might have a kid or you might not, but this is an easy one for people to guess. So the kid was like, I just don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I'm good enough. I don't know. I feel like I'm going to mess it up. You know how you would deal with them. You would be like all sweetness and gentleness, or maybe you'd give them a really nice kick up the butt, but in a nice way. You'd be encouraging and you'd be supportive and you'd remind them, come on, you're forgetting how much of a badass you are. You've definitely done good stuff in the past and you'd do it again. And even if you can't get it right first time, if you keep going, you can figure it out. That's the kind of encouragement you would give somebody else or a kid if they were self-doubting. But do you give that kind of encouragement and support to yourself? I started to do it and oh my God, amazing. So much nicer. And let me tell you, so much more effective. Like for anyone who thinks this is a soft skill, I can tell you it's not as hardcore. Changing this approach has allowed me to completely change my life. So I can tell you that it works. And sometimes I even have like a conversation with the self-doubt where I do a visualization where it's like a little character and I interact with it. Now, some of you are going to think this is like completely fucking crazy. That's fine. But if your self-doubt shows up all the time, you might want to try this. So I imagine the self-doubt as this little character. And the way it came to my mind was that it was like this little wispy, it looked like a little ghost, but it had like a little butt. So cute. And it kind of, I invited it to come into the room in this visualization. I had my eyes closed. I invited it to come into the room. At first, it didn't want to come because it was like, you don't want to hear from me. I know you don't like me. And I was like, no, come. It's fine. And then I interact with it and I'm like, what are you afraid of? And it tells me, and I'm like, what would help you? What would soothe you? How can I support you? Like, I would just interact with this little ghost thing, self-doubt ghost thing. And it is the nicest, most like soothing thing for self-doubt ever. You can also do this with loads of other things. If you're afraid of something, if you have anxiety or whatever, you can like invite it into the room with you and do some playing with it, do some interacting with it. And I do this regularly now. So if I really feel the self-doubt, I'll close my eyes, invite it into the room, and it just runs in now. It's not really that much afraid of me anymore. And it loves like just laying on my chest. It loves me like patting its little ghost bum. and it likes cuddles. Amazingly, it's unbelievably like me because it is a part of me. It's like the self-doubting part of me that's like a scared little ghost kid. And I'm, instead of ignoring it and shoving it away or being angry with it, I'm like inviting it in and I'm comforting it, I'm soothing it. And it's just such a nice way of dealing with it. And the self-doubt appreciates it, and I appreciate it. And if I've lost you right here and you're like, oh my God, this woman's crazy, fine, find another podcast. But if you're with me, do give this a go because I found it amazingly effective. And if you can't think of it like that, or if that's just too way out for you, remember what you would want from someone else if you were saying to them, oh, I've just got a lot of self-doubt about this and I don't know if I could do it. What would you want them to, how would you want them to be with you? What would you want them to do for you? You'd probably want them to acknowledge how you were feeling, right? Oh, yeah, I can hear you having a hard time with that. Maybe you'd want them to remind you about good stuff you've done in the past. You'd probably want a bit of a pep talk. You want a bit of encouragement. You'd want a bit of support. Maybe you'd want a cuddle. Excuse me. So whatever it is that you would want from someone else, if you were having a lot of self-doubt, I'm going to suggest that you learn intentionally how to give that to yourself, and you give that to yourself. All right. That was number 2. Number 3, the third thing I've done, which has really helped me to deal with self-doubt, is to actually admit it. So it's not a secret anymore that I keep inside all the time like I used to. Hello, my name is Anna, and I experience self-doubt. People sometimes are surprised that when I say that to them, because they're like, oh my God, you're so confident. And I'm like, well, yeah, but also I'm a normal human being who gets scared and has doubts and worries and fears and insecurities like everybody does. Everybody experiences self-doubt, but for the most part, no one's talking about it. So you just think that it's you, but it's not. So I started to actually admit it. Like in the past, I guess I was just so hell-bent on keeping this like very sort of professional, confident persona of this person that, you know, could just ride through everything and just didn't have any, you know, doubts or fears, and I would just deal with everything. But that was only what it looked like on the outside. It wasn't at all, in fact, how it was on the inside. Yeah, some days I was confident like everyone, but other days I was just like a bundle of self-doubt and knots inside, but I would never admit it. I do now. On purpose. I try and admit it. And I used to be afraid of admitting it. And now, whenever I do, I always find that nothing bad really happens. I think I used to be afraid that if I admitted it, something bad would happen or it would reflect badly on me, but it doesn't seem to. When I'm honest about it, it never seems to reflect that badly on me. So I wonder if you're keeping a lot of self-doubt inside, whether you could approach it like this too. Whether you could start to maybe admit it, maybe let the secret out of the closet. Back when I was still a manager in the NHS, I would often ask people, like I would give someone a piece of work or would be doing something. And if I noticed someone struggling, I'd make a point of saying to them, what's your brain telling you about this? And remarkably, I was always surprised that they would, I don't know if the question just startles people a bit, but they tend to answer quite honestly. And they would say something like, oh, they would reveal some self-doubt, right? They would say, not really sure, no, quite know how to do it, or, I think I'm going to mess it up, or I'm just not really that good at like telephone negotiation, whatever it was. They would, caught off guard, they would admit it. And once they'd admitted it, it was never as hard to handle as it was when it stayed inside. Believe me, if you think you're the only one in your workplace experiencing self-doubt, I can tell you that you're absolutely not. I coach really senior people, and I see the inside of their head. And let me tell you, the self-doubt is real, and it comes at every level. It isn't something that is just unique to you. Maybe it's unique to humans, but we all share that experience of being human and experiencing self-doubt. So if you dare, admit it. And if you can't admit it to somebody else, at least just admit it to yourself. You could even say out loud, oh, excuse me, I'm not going to edit that because I can't be asked to do editing, but admit it to yourself. Maybe if you find yourself procrastinating one day, be like, okay, what's going on here? And you might say, oh, I don't know if I can do this. Maybe I'm going to mess it up. Honestly, it feels like breathing out. Admit it to somebody else if you can. How honest do you dare be? I have a vision of a world, like a workplace world, where everyone's actually just honest. And they're like, oh, I'm very afraid of doing this because I think it's going to make me look bad and damage my chances of promotion. Everyone's thinking it, but no one's saying it. It's the most ridiculous thing ever. But that is probably how we've been socialized. But we could socialize ourselves differently, more honestly. My experience is that actually it's made self-doubt a lot easier to handle. Now, one of the other things that I do is I take it to my coach. I actually have 2 coaches at the moment, but I could take it to either of them. Or I'm just more honest with the people around me and I tell them about the doubts that I've got and the fears that I've got. So much better than keeping it inside. And I want you to remember this. Self-doubt is a bit like a vampire. It thrives on the inside in the dark, right? Inside you. If you just keep it inside you, it thrives. Now, what I'm going to encourage you to do is like open the curtain and let a little bit of sunshine onto the vampire. And one of 2 things will happen, I promise. Either the vampire just crumbles to dust. The self-doubt is like, oh yeah, actually I can see that that's not quite right or quite true. And I think I probably can do it. Or at the very least, the vampire doesn't look quite as scary when you open the curtain as it did when the curtain was closed. And it weakens the voice of the self-doubt. If you can admit it, acknowledge it, engage with it, care for it, but also be resolute that it's not going to stop you. All right, that's what I've got for you this week. That is my top 3 things around self-doubt. If you want to share anything with me on the back of this episode, then please do. I love hearing from people. You can find me on Instagram or LinkedIn. But also, we still have a few places left for the Confident at Work program, which starts in September. This is for professional women who want to increase their confidence. And as part of that, we look at how you manage self-doubt. And it is revolutionary for the people that actually manage to really get a handle on it. Part of the work that we'll be doing in Confident at Work, all around self-doubt. So if you think, maybe I could do with doing some work and doing some focus on this, then ask me, get in touch about coming to join us. We start in September and we've got a few spots left. Places will be open until then. So that's all I've got for you this week. I hope you enjoyed episode 8. Share it with your friend if you think they need it. Probably no one's telling you about their own self-doubt, so maybe you don't know, but maybe you do. All right. I'll see you in episode 9. Lots of love. Bye.